Welcome, welcome, welcome back, my Be Health Empowered family, to another week of Excuse Me, Doctor. Of course, my name is Dr. Melissa Clark. Thank you so much for joining me. And many of you already know me as Dr. MEL, and that is cool. We are here every week doing what we do on Excuse Me, Doctor, making sure that you have the information that you need to make wise health decisions, not just for you, but for your family and your community. And of course, we're streaming on YouTube. We're on Facebook Live. Please, if you're a newbie or if you've just forgotten to do it so far, please just go ahead and hit that subscribe button on YouTube and that like on Facebook. Really, really, really appreciate you for it. And of course, since we are here to answer your questions, we want to make sure that you are putting your questions in the chat, your comments, your thoughts. Please go ahead and do that as we move through our show today. So now, let us get into creating an amazing week for ourselves with all the health topics we're going to cover today. And of course, to do that, I have to have my two partners in crime, Mr. Wayne Bruce and Miss Bria Good.
Howdy,
How
howdy,
are
howdy.
you all doing?
So good to see y'all today.
I know, same here. I know y'all gonna be bringing us the word from the street, quote unquote, otherwise known as the chat, um, and, and representing. So thank you all for being here.
Can't wait. It is a incredible show. It's timely. I'm excited about it. It's all things we and it's homecoming week all across the nation for everybody.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. So hopefully everybody is partying responsibly.
Partying responsibly.
Keyword responsibly.
And we hope your team wins.
Right. So you were talking about what we're going to cover tonight. We're talking about whoopings, basically. I mean, corporal punishment, spankings, spare the rod, spoil the child, quote unquote. Is all that really the case?
Go outside, pick your own switch.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm from that generation.
Yeah.
The sheer intimidation of picking the weapon that was meant to, I mean, forget the beating. It was the walk to the bushes to
get that was
switch.
anxiety provoking.
Oh
yes, exactly. So yeah, we're gonna be talking about that and why we as Black people kind of stand by that. So we're gonna get into it tonight. So I hope y'all are ready to start, typing and throwing your comments up in the chat, because we have an incredible guest who is going to walk with us through that topic. So
I mean,
stay tuned.
Dr. Bell, it was terrifying to walk and get your switch. And I mean, at 22, you should be over that stuff. So my grandmama, at 22, my grandmama would.
It sounds like you being re-traumatized all over again. Just think about it.
I mean, no, it's really a interesting discussion, and we should,
and very important, very important. And so everybody, make sure that you share. Stop what you're doing. Share this right now with all the parents all the grandparents and stay tuned, because it's going to be a really good discussion.
It's going to be good. But before we do, we have to go to the week that was in health and wellness, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Our weekly recap. Let's do it.
Let's get into it. So, of course, we got to start with the COVID update, and everyone's talking about the COVID booster shots, whether they should get it, whether they should not get it, the whole thing, COVID. So what's the new thing with the COVID update and the boosters?
Yeah. So, our over 65 crowd are doing great with the boosters, over 70%. But if you look at just adults in general over 18, it's only about 50%. So why get boosted? Right? Well, a University of Michigan study showed that we as Black people do not do well with COVID unless we are prepared with boosters. We know about the disproportionate deaths from COVID, right? But we also get hospitalized more. we get hospitalized at younger ages. And if we come out of the hospital, which people rarely talk about, we tend to have more disability, more likely to have to take longer to go back to work, more likely to be readmitted to the hospital within 60 days. And if we need those work accommodations, guess what? We're less likely to get them. So all these are reasons to get boosted so that we're prepared as we go into the wintertime where we know COVID cases are going to go up, and also the flu. So, yeah.
Yeah, we got to think about COVID holistically, right? Because the only thing people think about with COVID is just death. Like, we're going to die and that's it. But there's a lot of other things to consider when living in a post or current COVID world, right? So please get y'all booster shots.
That's right. That's right.
And moving on to the next topic. So this kind of surprised me as well, because this directly impacts people like me, because I love to work out and wear clothes. So I've heard a little bit about poisonous clothes. What is that about?
So it turns out that the Center for Environmental Health, which is like a watchdog organization, found 11 brands of clothing companies that manufacture sports bras and athletic shirts, and found that they have this toxic chemical in them called BPA. Now, I had heard of BPA being like in water bottles and plastics and getting into our drinking water, but yet it's in these clothes, and studies have shown that it gets absorbed through the skin, gets into the bloodstream, and even after a few minutes, it can cause issues, right?
Mm-hmm. So what exactly does BPA do?
So what it does, and keep in mind, we're wearing these sports bras and athletic shirts for hours at a time, and we're sweating in them, so our pores are open. So that whole thing, we're absorbing more chemicals. But BPA specifically mimics hormones in our body, like estrogen, for example, or it can block hormones, our hormones, from working in our body, and cause negative health effects, everything from cancer to weight gain. And even babies, if a pregnant mom is exposed to BPA, they can develop problems that manifest later, much later in life, like ovarian cancer and breast cancer. So it's a serious thing.
Wow. And what do you know the brands that are having this issue with the BPA?
So yeah, so there's some well-known brands that I know a lot of y'all will recognize. So both sports bras and athletic shirts manufactured by Athleta, North Face, and Brooks. And then sports bras alone by Pink, Asics, All in Motion, Nike, and Fila. And then athletic shirts by Mizuno, New Balance, and Reebok. And I got to say, I never heard of Mizuno. Maybe that's because I don't wear a lot of athletic shirts.
Well, they make shoes too, Dr. Mel.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, they're on the list.
But
So,
wow.
I just want to ask, what kind of sports bra is North Face making?
It keeps you warm. That's what it does.
Right, exactly. That's the key
you
thing.
working out, you got to be pretty daggone cold. It's got to be colder than a witch's, you know what?
Well, it might be those cold weather sports bras, going into the winter.
All right. So, I mean, not that I'm interested in sports bras, but North Face is a sports bra.
Inquiring minds want to know, huh?
Yeah. You got to watch out for the knockoffs there.
I need to go through my closet and throw all these things out now. I'm like, sheesh, can't even work out in this stuff no more.
Sheesh.
I know. Well, the bottom line is these 11 brands will have 60 days to work with the Center for Environmental Health on a plan to get rid of these high levels of BPA in their clothes.
Wow.
So stay tuned.
That is incredible. I want to keep with the sports theme, the workout theme, but without the BPA. And, I've increased my activity in the gym, but it's mainly been on walking. So I'm happy to hear about the next thing. You talk about life-saving steps, life-saving benefits of taking more steps.
Yeah. So this is the deal. And I think everybody who's like over 40 realizes this, that you gain a pound or two a year starting in young adulthood through middle age. And of course, this just kind of creeps on, and next thing you know, you're at an unhealthy weight. So it turns out, though, that people who walk 4 to 5 miles a day, that's 8,000 to 10,000 steps, were less likely to become overweight and obese and get all the problems that's associated with that. So diabetes, high blood pressure, sleep apnea, acid reflux, even dementia and depression seem to benefit in this range of walking 8 to 10,000 steps a day. And it turns out that it doesn't have to be that you're just, walking on a power walk, getting these steps. It's just like doing activities around the house, like housework, gardening, washing the car, walking the dog. All those steps count too.
Wow. That's incredible. I mean, because I was thinking you had to get on the treadmill. So that means I can walk around my house.
Yes, you can walk around in the house in a
So I
circle.
can get rid of the treadmill.
Yeah, as long as you're getting it in through activity and walking around, yes. Because the thing is this, when our muscles contract, they release a chemical into our bodies, a positive chemical that helps to decrease inflammation in our bodies. And we know inflammation is what leads to all kinds of chronic diseases, including obesity. So that's why just moving your muscles, getting up and moving, makes all the difference in the world. Like they say, sitting is the new smoking. Don't want to do it too much.
So you have to walk for how long per day? Like how many minutes per day?
25 minutes each day. Turns out you cut your risk for dying from all causes by a third. That is really significant.
Wow.
So I guess if you mix that with eating plant-based diet and, like you say, always say, Dr. Mel, de-stressing and all that, is that the magic recipe?
Yes, it is. Getting your sleep, connecting with others. So not being socially isolated. All those things help to increase our longevity.
Yes. So y'all gotta walk to get your boosters, and then walk to your walk to the grocery store, get your plant-based diet, walk to your friends.
Right. There you go. You got it.
People in the chat already want to know why do men lose calories faster than women?
Because I know it's a shame. I was about to use a cuss word, but yeah, because men tend to have a higher muscle mass starting off with, and muscle burns calories faster than fat. So women tend to not have as much muscle as men do in general.
Y'all lucky out here.
I'm telling you, it's a shame.
Yeah, I can't wait to eat my plant-based ribs.
So way on that note.
Speaking of life-saving events, right? So a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the fact that it's October Breast Cancer Awareness Month, right? And we had a very, very special guest come on talking about the importance of getting mammograms and checking yourself. Can you talk a little bit more about the importance of Breast Cancer Awareness Month?
So I just wanted to mention, remind everybody that the American Cancer Society recommends that breast cancer screening begin at age 45 with the option to start earlier at age 40. Now, who should be in that early starting category? People who have a history in their family of breast cancer, and Black women, because Black women tend to get breast cancer at earlier ages, get that aggressive triple negative form, which is sometimes harder to treat, and they get it more often, and then have a 31% higher rate of dying from breast cancer than any other ethnic group, right, in the United States. And I want to especially recognize my medical school roommate, Dr. Carmen Parrott. She was a dermatologist. She passed away at age 38 from breast cancer. She didn't even get a chance to live her life. And in honor of her, I wanted to specifically mention this and also say, all my sisters out there listening and the men who love them, take self-care seriously. The plant-based eating, even if they're plant-based ribs, avoiding processed foods, limiting your alcohol intake. There's a correlation between breast cancer and alcohol in women. And then that daily movement, it makes a difference. And of course, getting your yearly mammogram.
Okay. So please go and get the yearly mammogram. It's really, really important. It's very, very important.
Right.
Absolutely.
It is that is wise words. Those are wise words. And I just want to remind everybody that's why we have up on the screen the pink ribbon. Because this month is we honor your your college roommate, my sister, my older sister, and we honored them and thousands of other ladies who've been diagnosed and overcome it, and those who've been diagnosed and we lost them. So not that cancer beat them, we lost them. So you know, the loss is ours all the time. But I want to move on, Dr. Mel, and talk about our young people. It kind of plays into tonight's topic that really they're finding out that young kids and young people 19 and under really aren't okay right now. Like they're really struggling at this point.
Yeah, there was a new study that came out, and in the 5 years between 2016 and 2021, there was a 60% increase in kids under 19 getting hospitalized for mental health issues.
Wow.
And it wasn't just, oh yeah, that's just those, rich people or, whatever. That wasn't the case. Actually, in the Medicaid population, it went up 40%. And it's really no wonder, with social media, 2.5 years of pandemic life, not being able to go to school, and then just the craziness in our society, gun violence, school shootings, and then for Black children specifically, media exposure to all the images of police assaulting Black people. I mean, there are all these and dealing with microaggressions and racism. It's just a perfect storm for mental health issues. And we've seen the rates of suicide in Black people go up, something that we never thought would happen, because we always said, oh, that's something that Black people don't do or young Black people don't do. That's not the case anymore. So, it's really important for parents and teachers, everybody who is around young people, to know the signs of depression, like appetite and weight changes, isolation, withdrawal, changes in school performance. All these are red flags. And talking with your children on a regular basis to sort of understand where they are, what they're thinking, and understanding, do they need help? Because there's no shame in that, of course.
No shame. Actually, parents and teachers need to educate themselves just so we can make sure our young people get through the educational process.
Right.
So,
they're struggling right now.
It's time for us to close ranks and really build walls around these young people, man. Really be a social support, have the social support system together.
And let them know that it's okay.
Sorry. Go ahead, Bria.
No, just saying, just let him know it's okay to have conversations like this, because kind of talking about like the Black community specifically, we don't talk about these things and they're kind of brushed under the rug. So it's just being like, okay, like, let's talk about this. This is real. Your feelings are valid, because sometimes kids don't feel like their feelings are validated.
Exactly. And I know you've worked with a lot of young people around reproductive health, and I'm sure those conversations come up all the time. So thanks for adding that in.
Of course.
So Dr. Mel, you do know what time it is, right?
No clue. What time is it?
It's time.
The weekly debunk. Stopping misinformation in its tracks.
So this week, we have Tony, the cousin of Tyrone Twitter Fingers.
Lord Jesus.
Said, Tony is outrageous. He hit me with this one. They're out here trying to destroy our community. Did you hear that Biden or Byron or whoever and them have a new program where they're giving away 30 million crack pipes?
Oof. Man, I don't know about that one. Tony is saying all types of crazy things, but excuse me, Dr. Mel, is that correct? Is that really true?
That is absolutely not true. So I think Tony is probably talking about a program called the Harm Reduction Program Grant. They're giving away $30 million worth of grant funds to health organizations and community-based organizations who are trying to address drug addiction in communities across the country. So this is the thing. Addiction is not a moral failing where we just tell people, quote unquote, just say no. You know, that's so 1980s Nancy Reagan. There is a whole new way of treating substance use disorder. It's treated more like a chronic disease, let's say like diabetes. So, you know, we don't tell people with diabetes just say no to carbs, right? They're counseled on eating and other lifestyle changes, but they're also treated with insulin and other medications until such time as they can manage their disease with lifestyle changes alone. And for many people, that never comes. They stay on insulin and medications for the duration of their disease. And so it's the same with drug use disorders. People with addictions need to be treated sometimes with medications and what are called harm reduction strategies, interventions that keep them safe, even when they are using drugs. They may relapse or may continue to use intermittently. And so these federal funds allowed for the purchase of safe smoking kits that include rubber mouthpieces, brass screens, lip balm, disinfectant wipes, no crack pipes. And the purpose was to stop the spread of disease from sharing pipes or sharing needles. And I should say that doesn't just protect the user, it also protects from other people who they come in contact with from infectious diseases like HIV or hepatitis that can be contracted from unsafe practices around using drugs. So get the facts. Please tell Tony that's not true. Tell him don't believe the hype.
Tony outrageous, man. That whole Twitter family sometimes will be just trying to set my phone on fire.
Right.
They go from safe kits to crack pipes. I don't get the correlation.
It was a big jump. It was a big jump. But anyway, thank you all. We're going to see you all back really soon because it's time to fold into what we are here to talk about tonight, which is tackling a subject that everybody has a strong opinion about and considers themselves an expert on: corporal punishment, otherwise known as spankings or quote unquote whoopings. A 2015 Pew Research survey found that Black parents are more than twice as likely as white or Latino parents to use corporal punishment on a regular basis, and are far less likely to never spank their children. So we're going to talk about this tonight. We're going to wade into these waters, and we have a special guest who is, I'm honored that she is here with us tonight, Dr. Stacy Patton. She's an award-winning American journalist, college professor at both Morgan State and Howard University. And most importantly for our show tonight, she's a nationally recognized child advocate whose research focuses on the intersections of race and childhood. And she wrote the book, Spare the Kids Why Whooping Children Won't Save Black America. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Patton.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here with you.
Absolutely. Well, I'm just going to go straight into it. What is the deal with spankings? Are they necessary to bring up a well-balanced, disciplined child?
Absolutely not. Actually, a lot of parents who argue that children are in need of spankings in order to stay out of prison, to become law-abiding folks, to be successful, are actually doing something that is counterintuitive, that actually sets them up for a lowered IQ, negative outcomes in terms of school performance. The research shows that it sows the seeds for aggressive behavior, deviancy, and short and long-term health problems that might not show up until after puberty or later on in life. So it's absolutely not necessary to put your hands on your child in order for them to have good outcomes.
Well, I know there are a lot of people who are like, what? I got spanked and I turned out okay. What do you say to people, and it was good enough for me, so it's good enough for my children. What do you say to, to that point of view?
Depends on my mood. Sometimes those phrases that you just cited are evidence that people didn't turn out fine. You were hit as a kid, and it's the only kind of violence, based on the research that we see, that people tend to invert as good. So kids who witness domestic violence between adults, describe it once they become adults as something that was negative for them to be exposed to. But because we grow up with people who say, I whoop you, I spank you because I love you, then what happens is you hold on to that rationale, and become an adult who believes that, oh, this was necessary. And it's hard for people to look back on their parents and say, oh, they did something that actually, hurt me. But I always ask people, well, how much better could you have been had you not, experienced that kind of violence? That's always a red flag when, I hear somebody say, look, I'm not in prison today. I'm this good person today because somebody hit me. And when I hear Black people say that, I say, oh, you agree with masses logic, a longstanding logic that goes back to the plantation that says in order to keep Black people in line, you have to process their bodies through violence.
So wait a minute, before we go back in history, because that's opened up a whole can of worms there, and we're going to get to that. You said that parents will say, well, I love my child, that's why I spank them. And so there's this verse, Proverbs 13:24, that says, whoever spares the rod hates their children, but the one who loves their child is careful to discipline them. So I'm sure you've heard that. What do you say, to that particular scripture?
Well, a lot of people misquote it and say the Bible says, spare the rod, spoil the child. And that sentence isn't, even in the Bible. But you have to understand the Hebrew interpretation of the Bible, the context in which it was written, what the rod actually means. It was, there's a rod and a staff. So the shepherd, these are tools of the shepherd to guide and protect the sheep. The only time a shepherd wielded a rod was to ward off wolves, to keep, the sheep from being attacked or devoured. And then the staff had this little hook on there. So you pull the sheep out from rocky areas, pull them back into the fold for protection. There's nothing about, beating sheep with a rod, because they were valuable and they were used as sacrifices to God. So you didn't want them scared and blemished and, scarred. So people don't have an accurate interpretation of the Bible. And also African Americans didn't, we're new to Christianity. The people who ended up on those ships from West Africa weren't Christians. We weren't reading the King James Version. It was illegal for us to read. And we didn't learn English for like the first century that we were in this country. So our interpretation of biblical scripture came from Massa. So we need to interrogate how we came to Christianity.
Right. And you're absolutely right. When it says whoever spares the rod, it doesn't say whoever uses the rod to beat their child.
No, not at all.
So, okay, you definitely opened my eyes on that scripture. So, we've seen the use of spankings go down worldwide, especially in schools. But just like that Pew Research study that I started off with, in the African American, Caribbean community, sort of throughout the diaspora outside of Africa, it's really, spankings are embraced and considered necessary. Why is that? And I have a feeling it has to do with some of the stuff that you've already brought up about our experiences in slavery.
So on the data, the majority of children worldwide are still being hit. Corporal punishment is still being used since the 1970s, late 1970s, when Sweden became the first country to ban it. We've seen a slow and incremental decline in the use. In the United States, the majority of parents across race and ethnicity are still hitting their kids. African Americans do not hold a monopoly over this practice. We just, in terms of raw numbers, are just slightly higher, but there's not a huge, statistic statistical difference.
Mhm.
With the exception of Asians, all racial and ethnic groups embrace corporal punishment and use it to hit their kids. Every state has a law that says how you can appropriately hit a child. 19 states still allow paddling in public schools. Black children are disproportionately targeted for teachers, coaches, and administrators to hit them. And there's a different kind of cultural specificity amongst Black folks as to why we embrace this. And it's a byproduct of colonization, slavery.
Welcome back, everybody. These technical things happen. Thanks for hanging in there with us. We are still here with Dr. Stacy Patton. We are talking about corporal punishment, spankings, and we're going to pick right back up where we left off. Dr. Patton, you were in the middle of telling us about, is spanking a Black cultural tradition? Like, there are a lot of African Americans and Caribbean people. That was my upbringing, being in a Caribbean plus African American family. Certainly corporal punishment was on the table. And so is it a Black cultural tradition?
Whooping a Black child is the whitest thing you can do to destroy your child, spiritually, intellectually, physically. It is not native to us. And I wrote about this in Spare the Kids. In order to understand the historical genesis and evolution of this practice within our communities, we don't begin in the American South with slavery. We don't begin with Black folks in the diaspora. You go back to Europe. To a culture of people who had been destroying children for thousands of years, the birthplace of corporal punishment, the sort of ritualistic violence against children. And so the degree to which Black people practice this tradition is a byproduct of colonization, enslavement, and indoctrination into a bastardized version of Western Christianity. We held children in different esteem in West African cultures, considering them gods, returned ancestors. We did not consider children to be property. We didn't practice childism, which is this idea that children are inferior, that you own them, that they need coercive, violent discipline. And in many other indigenous cultures around the world, they too did not practice this kind of ritualistic violence against children. So it's not native to us. It's a distorted gift from the people that we had a misfortune of coming into contact with and becoming victims of their oppressive behaviors.
One of the things that I read exactly along the lines of what you're saying is, as we progress through the 1800s, the individuals who were kidnapped from Africa became younger and younger, especially as we came to the time of when the slave trade was about to be banned, because they wanted younger people who would age longer. And so what role did that have in terms of not having a clear understanding of child rearing practices? If you were taken from your homeland and from your parents as a child, it seems like you would be more vulnerable to new ways or things that were against your tradition of raising children.
I think that statement is true. Definitely. The majority of captives who ended up on those ships were young people in general. But as we get, as you said, closer to the 19th century with market demands, you have children who are, young as 8, 9, 10 years old, being bought over for specific labor practices. But what's true is that these people were taken from different countries, spoke different languages, came from different cultures, had different cultural conceptions about things like religion, about child rearing, foodways, all of those sorts of things. So these people didn't come here with a universal parenting guide that said things like, oh, when your child acts up, go get a switch and whoop them. That's not what happened. And so again, it's, their seasoning process, breaking people to get them ready for this coercive system is where these, new ideas and new practices, begin to burgeon. And then like when we think about religion, these people didn't speak English right away. It took a couple of generations for that to happen. So our natural ways of being, whether it's our foods, spiritual practices and parenting, got distorted and perverted in order to help sustain this, slavery regime.
And before we go to the chat, because I'm sure there are some questions there, I wanted to say, can you maybe give us a little bit of background on how you decided personally to focus on corporal punishment in African American children and children in general? How did that become your passion?
So I was adopted by an African American family, middle class folks who lived in the suburbs. I was 5 years old when I came to live with them. And my adoptive mother was the first person to ever put her hands on me. And very early on, even before my adoption was legalized, I was whooped with belts, switches, hangers, all of those sorts of things. And at 5 years old, I never normalized this. She said it was love. It was to protect me from the white man, to make sure I'm obedient, that I didn't fall victim to the streets, that I didn't become a young girl who got pregnant, all of these different rationale, but it didn't feel like love. It didn't feel like protection. And because she wasn't my real mama, that, made it, that was actually a protective factor for me so that I didn't grow up to become somebody who rationalized being hit. And so I ran away from home very early on, ended up in foster care, was lucky enough to get a full scholarship to boarding school and then on to college. And I knew that I wanted to dedicate the rest of my life, trying to convince, especially my people to let go of this, let go of masses, lash. And every day I wake up and I look at these scars on my face from an extension cord beating from when I was 7 years old. And it's this fleshy braille that reminds me that I don't want any more kids to grow up experiencing that kind of pain and degradation that I went through.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I can tell from your passion, you are a true crusader. And from the first time I heard you speak, I was, just, I already believed it, but I was mesmerized by everything that you had to say. And so I'm really glad that you're here tonight. And I would love now to go to the chat and see what some of the questions and comments are. So Bria and Wayne, if you could come on back on and let us know what's going on out there. Do people have questions?
Yes.
It's tough to get our questions back. Here's
Okay.
You take the first question, Bria?
Yeah, for sure. So the first question comes from Yvonne Smith. And the question is, how should parents discipline children under 7?
Okay, so one of my big caveats I tell people is I'm not a parenting expert. I do not teach people how to raise their kids. I'm a child advocate, which means I fight childism and I advocate for children's rights. But there are tons of sites out there and programs like conscious parenting, gentle parenting, positive discipline, where you can go. They have free resources to help teach parents about child development, about brain development, because a lot of times people have unreasonable expectations for what their children can do because they don't realize that that part of the brain isn't even developed yet. So that's part of the problem. Also, if you're hitting your child, you need some help. You need, if we had adults who were hitting each other, we'd say you need some anger management, right? And so parents need to do step one is figure out what their own triggers are, and think about the state of their own brain and their ability to regulate their emotions and get some therapy, because we can sit here and give people a 10 or 20-point plan of you need to do this, 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 and that if your child does X, Y, and Z. But if you don't know how to regulate your own nervous system, those tips aren't going to stick very well.
Wow.
Great points.
That's great. Here we go. Can you speak on body autonomy for young people?
So the way I see bodily autonomy, and because I don't agree with childism, is that I believe that children deserve to have the same rights to bodily autonomy as adults. The fact that it is a felony for adults, an adult to assault another adult or even an animal, but it's codified in law that children can be hit by their parents, is a form of childism. So we don't respect children's bodily autonomy in this country. The fact that we have 19 states where it is still legal to hit kids in schools. It's still legal in every state except New Jersey and Iowa to hit children in private in charter schools. This country is the only country that has not signed on to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of the Child, because in that declaration says that children should be free from corporal punishment. So we have this guiding document, these guiding principles that this country that likes to say that it respects children hasn't even signed on to.
Wow. Incredible. So,
well, go ahead.
So we have a question from Sharon Merkerson. How do you recommend effective discipline? Of course, yeah. How do you recommend effective discipline?
Well, it's so interesting to me. We would not say if the subject is men hitting women, beating their wives, their girlfriends, or vice versa.
We can't even joke about that.
We know nobody would be asking this question.
Right.
How do you tell men not to hit their significant others or vice versa? But we have to have this sort of discussion for adults with children. Once again, it's childism that we even have to have these kinds of discussions. But discipline means to teach, right? It means, so if you're hitting a child, what are you teaching them? People need to learn effective communication, to model behavior, to do the work of understanding how the brain works, to get to the why behind these behaviors. And step one is therapy. If you're already hitting your child, you need therapy. The child is not the problem. The children are doing what is developmentally normal. So I hear parents all the time saying, oh, my child doesn't listen to me. They can't, I'm saying things over and over again and they're not listening to me. And then you ask them, how old is your child? Oh, she's 2. And I'm like, hello, that part of the brain for listening, for prefrontal cortex is not developed yet. They're incapable of this. So it's a holistic approach that needs to happen to answer that question before we even get to the steps of discipline. There's work that parents need to do on their own bodies. They need to look back on their own childhoods and recognize that some of the things that were done to them was traumatic. It changed their brain chemistry. It rewired their brain. It messed with their ability to emotionally regulate, right? And so now they're parents and they're seeing their children's normal developmental behaviors and they're triggered by it because, oh, that child is climbing on that. When I was a kid, I would have got whooped. So they're often reacting to this stuff from their own childhood and then carrying it forward onto their own children. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to rewire people's brains. Right. Our cultural thinking about children as property. It's a lot of different layers to answer that question.
And I think you mentioned therapy, and I would also, it sounds like parenting classes as well, that parenting is not just an accident. It's a very intentional thing that you do. And that there are ways to do it, which culturally we've been stripped of because of our history. And so sort of starting again from scratch and having the humility to start from scratch with therapy and with parenting classes as well.
Absolutely.
What else we have out there? Bria?
Yeah, so this is a little bit of a longer question. So roll with me here. Um, it says, I've taken the book Spare the Kids for a read to have something to do in between classes. And it has brought up interesting conversations, such as statements that say, I rebuke it in the name of Jesus. This is what is wrong with y'all young people. You get all this worldly stuff in your heads and don't honor your parents. How do you set boundaries and rules with people and create a safe space to talk about this topic? That's a good question.
Great question.
I think this podcast is a perfect example of that. You know, creating spaces, particularly with us, to have these honest discussions. One of the things I do is a lot of community conversations. So I travel to cities like New Orleans and Chicago, Philadelphia, and we meet in churches, we meet in schools. You know, I have these conversations in hair salons and barbershops, you know, in the churches especially. And anytime I'm invited to have a radio discussion about this, it's an opportunity to shift, you know, some people's mentalities around this. And, you know, also we have to combat those statements, Bria, that people say, you know, about young people, you know, to combat these myths. So, for example, people will say, these kids today, you know, are horrible. And it's usually from the people whose generation was on crack or, you know, creating all kinds of sociological problems, right? It's always interesting to me, like people from the 80s, you know, this, you know, making these statements about millennials and Gen Zs, but the data don't bear it out. These children are drinking less, they're doing less drugs, violent crime, juvenile crime has gone down. This generation is much more politically engaged, and we have to stop pretending like children give birth to themselves or raise themselves. If these kids are so horrible, it's because they had horrible parents raising them. These kids are products of their environments, and they're giving back to and mirroring back to us what we put into them. And it's if the kids are acting out, it's because they're traumatized. All that whooping, all that yelling, all that cussing out of kids, right? Shaming them on social media, cutting off their eyebrows, all of that stuff, on top of what Dr. Mel was talking about with these viral videos of Black people being shot and killed, you know, all the racism. It's a toxic stew that our young people are ingesting, the smog of white supremacy, and we're becoming co-conspirators in that process. And we wonder why these kids are so angry. So we have to get past the myths.
Well said.
That was incredible. That was an incredible statement. So much there. But I want to take it forward, not necessarily to small children, but in college, a lot of our young people are pledging fraternities and sororities. I'm a fraternity member. Okay. Both Dr. Mel and Bria are sorority members. And I my thinking has changed in how people should enter the fraternities. I mean, when you know better, you do better, right? How in some of the fraternities, this beating stuff is happening and still happening, like still happening. What's your thought process on that?
So it's interesting. It's interesting you say that, because I was just in a documentary with Byron Hurt, the filmmaker. He just got about 2 or 3 weeks ago, PBS aired his documentary called Hazing. And it is focusing on his time being hazed and him turning around and hazing, but talking about the deaths of people in fraternities and sororities, the cultural mindset around that, right? The historical roots of the practice. And you know, it's a form of internalized racism. The people who are holding the paddles now and doing the branding and all of that sadistic violence are our own people, and it's something that needs to be purged from our culture. Again, it's the same ideology that we have in families who say, well, you got to struggle, you got to go through some pain, right? It's not going to kill you, it's going to make you stronger. Actually, it's messing up your internal wiring, your thinking, right? And then you know, want to pay it forward by continuing these cycles of violence. It's the exact same mentality, and we need to get rid of it.
Wow. Dr. Mel.
Wow, excellent question. Yeah. So, um, this has been amazing. There's one other thing that I wanted to get in, and you alluded to the disproportionate incarceration of Black men, and that being a reason why, you know, we have historically justified, spanking at home so that you don't get arrested or beat by the police or taken to jail. What are the statistics around that? What is there any basis for that?
I always say that if whooping children was so successful at keeping Black people out of jail, keeping them safe from police brutality or being killed, then why do we keep having national conversations about police brutality? Why did we have a whole Black Lives Matter movement? What this
Mm,
says to me is that people don't understand the history of the carceral state, the rise of the carceral state, which began in the 19th century, that needed Black bodies, young and old, to feed, a racist capitalist system, right? If whipping children were a prerequisite for success in this country, then Black people should be ruling this country, quite frankly. But when we look at the data, so one of the things I hear parents say to me all the time, if I don't whoop my child, the police will kill them. So I actually aggregated some numbers from, police shooting databases from like the Washington Post. It's called Fatal Force, and it emerged during the Black Lives Matter movement. It tracked the numbers of Black people and white people, other groups who were killed by cops. And I believe from like 2000, I maybe have the dates wrong, but it's like a 5-year look. And what I found was that a total of 41 Black children were killed by cops during that time. Then I looked
mm,
at the government's annual child maltreatment reports, which come out every single year. And during that same 5-year period, I found that over 2,000 Black children were killed as a result of maltreatment by their own parents. And so
Wow.
I don't say that in a Black on Black crime kind of way, like Fox News, but the reality is that Black children are more at risk of being assaulted, seriously injured, or killed by their own parents than the police. And we have to deal with those numbers. And the disproportionate number of the victims are Black boys, and the disproportionate number of perpetrators who kill Black children are Black women age 40 and under. That's what the data shows
wow.
us.
Wow. On
I
that
didn't know
note,
that.
yeah, that is mind blowing. And we have to wrap. I really want to thank you for being here. Really want to thank you for sharing all that wisdom, all that knowledge, your own story, covering everything from our history to our present.
Mhm.
We need
It's
to
just
have you back. The chat is
we,
asking for a part two.
So many
yeah,
Everybody's
questions.
asking for a part two. This is
absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, I thank you
But
for having this important public health conversation because, we talk about racial disparities in health, but we don't talk enough about the childhood roots of that, the accumulation of
exactly,
stress and inflammation in the body due to whoopings, right? So
exactly.
thank you
And
for
so
this.
that's a
Mhm.
huge part of it. And so thank you to Bria and Wayne. Thank you to the audience for all the wonderful questions and comments. I can't wait to go back and read the ones that we didn't get to. And before we go, I have to remind everybody in my Be Health Empowered family that there's a special research study that's being conducted at Howard University to find out how you have been faring and getting through the COVID-19 pandemic. It's called the COVID-19 Resilience Study. It doesn't mean that you had COVID, whether or not you had COVID or not, just how have you dealt with all the stresses of the pandemic. So you can get reimbursed up to $100 for participating, and all you have to do is fill out 2 surveys. That's it. So if you have any interest, please reach out to Dana Harvey, and her email is danaharveyresearch@gmail.com. So that's DANA Harvey, HARVEY, research@gmail.com. Well, that's it for us, y'all. Thank you, my Be Health Empowered family, for joining. This has been another episode of Excuse Me, Doctor. And until I see you again, remember, be wise, be well, and be health empowered.
So I guess I should thank the Robinsons. They invited me. They still don't know. I hooked up with Dave 3 days ago. He'll start coughing tomorrow. And I bet in 10 days he'll be on a ventilator. Now his wife, she's not vaccinated because she thinks it'll prevent her from being pregnant. But what they don't know is that I can decrease sperm count. Sorry, Dave.